several of you have heard this, but we appreciate you coming out. We felt like when we started talking about all the changes that went on in the city that maybe we would make some opportunities for our community just to hear from staff and hear about what some of those changes were and how they impact and affect the elections a little bit and how you actually file and what the dates are and kind of give you an idea of residency and who votes for who. And so we did a little bit of that, but also talking about the other changes, which are term limits, and just going through all of the things that have to do with what's going to be going on in November elections, et cetera, et cetera. And I had asked staff really back in the early this year to see if we might be able to do this and make it available, and we appreciate those of you that have come out and just kind of hear a little bit from them. I was asked about council members and talking and all that, and I said, I don't think that's necessary. I think we want staff just talk about the facts, and that's all we really need for this. So we really haven't had any other council members. I've been at all of these, but I've kind of done this little thing and then slipped out after a few minutes. So appreciate having our councilman Jeff Casper here tonight. Thanks for being here, Jeff. And really, you want to come and hear from these guys. They're going to talk a little bit about the budget cycle, and because that's a big thing that people don't really think about and know about until you hear it and see it a few times. And a little bit about what the Open Meetings Act is, and just a variety of things that we have to, rules, I guess, and procedures that we have to live by. And again, we're starting this process. We're trying to get people up to speed. And then if you know anybody that's interested in running, or if you're interested in running, just, please let us know and tell them. The information will be on our website. All these have been recorded. I've been asked to say every time, if you do want to have questions, that there's a microphone and there's a camera recording the sessions and the camera recording the questions. So just so you know, we'll have all that as well. So with that, I will let our esteemed city manager come up. He's been traveling back and forth to Austin today, but he looks all fresh, a lot fresher than me.
You just saw somebody else's name pop up there. My availability was in question tonight, so I made it a game time decision on whether I would do the presentation tonight. My name's Cliff Kahele. I'm the city manager. I've been with the city for nearly 24 years, and 3.5 of those as the city manager. And it's a great opportunity for us to be here tonight to talk about some of the changes going on in our community and our form of government. Just for everybody's sake, tonight's meeting was posted for this specific topic. If there are questions that are outside of the elections and the single-member districts, we'd ask you to hold off on those until the end. At any point, ask a question. We're available. Feel free to interrupt us if we've gone too fast or glossed over something. And but if you're not wanting to ask a question, but you do want to have a conversation, all of the staff will be here until the last citizen leaves tonight. So how did we get here? New single-member districts. In 2017, the City Council began to change the charter, and they began the discussions. And as it related to how the City Council was elected and how the City Council operated. Council formed a citizens committee to meet with residents and to gather input on what changes were needed. These public meetings were held over several months and gained significant input from residents. They were very well attended, had a lot of good questions and discussions about what direction the city should go. So the changes were recommended by the City Council, and an election was held in May of 2018. And citizens put into place basically several charter changes. The changes were included the single-member districts, as you might be aware. It also, which basically the single-member districts are 6 individual council districts where the council members are voted by people who live in those specific districts. We used to be under an at-large electoral system. The mayor is still elected at large. And come on in, we're just getting started, so you haven't missed much. We also had term limits put into place. Council members can now serve only a maximum of 4 two-year terms before they have to take a break and before they can serve again. So a maximum of 8 years on City Council. They can run for mayor immediately after that term. So, but the mayor also has term limits, just to be clear. The elections were also moved from May to November. The intent of this from the citizens group was to try to encourage more voter turnout. There was a concern that not many people voted in the May elections, and so the hope was more people would be familiar with the November date and come out to vote. And one of the other significant changes is we no longer have staggered terms. All council members are elected at the same time. So all 7 will be all positions are up for the election come this November. So basically, that's just kind of a brief overview of some of the charter changes, but we also felt that people who were interested in some of the changes would also kind of like a little bit of background on how city government works. And so we've got several people here who are going to go over some of the different aspects of how we operate on a daily basis. The city, by charter, is run by the council manager form of government. And the council manager form of government basically combines the leadership of elected officials with the experience of a professional manager. The council basically serves as the representatives of the citizen, and the city manager is over the day-to-day operations of the city. If you compare this to a structure of a business or a corporation, basically the citizens serve as the shareholders who elect a board of directors, which is the council, who hire a chief executive officer, which is the city manager. And the city manager is responsible for representing and hiring and firing over 1,200 employees. And I'll just say 234 of those people carry guns, and so it can be interesting sometimes. When in the council manager form of governments, there's a differentiation of duties, and so just to kind of explain where the city council operates. City council represents the people. They are responsible for going out and engaging and interacting with citizens to gain feedback on how the city should operate and what policies need to be put into place. They do this in a variety of ways. We have town hall meetings. We have neighborhood meetings. There's interactions at different community meetings and our community groups. And we also do citizen surveys. We try to get as much information as possible for the council to make policy decisions. And based on this input, then the council develops the policies that are necessary to move the city in the direction that they feel that the citizens want to go. In order to put these policies into action, the council is also responsible for setting the budget. And you'll hear from our our finance director here soon about the budget and a little bit of what goes into that. But the council is also responsible for setting the tax rate, which accounts for the revenues that are used for our budgeted expenditures. On the city manager side, the primary job of the city manager is to support the council by taking the policy direction and implementing the programs and services needed by the community. The city staff are advisors to council and provide strategies and options for council consideration. But at the end of the day, it's the council that puts everything in motion. So once a budget is set, it's the staff that puts these plans into action. We hire the staff, we purchase the equipment, and we make sure that everything is aligned with the council's directions. And the primary focus from staff is service delivery to our citizens. The other primary function of the city manager is to help align the staff's direction with the city council. As you would imagine, with several departments and 1,200 people and a lot of bright people in there, we could go in a lot of different directions. And one of my primary roles is to make sure that we don't have staff going off away from the council policies and council direction, and making sure we are fully aligned with the direction that's been given to us. And so basically, to kind of break down the process is, after hearing from the citizens, the council decides on where we're going. It's like getting on a bus. And the citizens are the passengers on the bus. The staff drives the bus and maintains it, makes sure it's in functioning order, and we take the citizens where we are going. And then it's my job to make sure that we have the best service on the bus along the way. A little bit about our form of government. As you dive a little bit deeper into how we operate and the rules that we live by, we operate under there's two forms of government that are allowed by the state of Texas. One is a home rule city, and the other one is a general law city. A general law city is usually a very small city, and they operate under parameters that are given by the legislature. They cannot move beyond what's told to them by the legislature. In Mesquite, we're a home rule city, and that was decided by the citizens back in the 1950s. And we are operated by a charter that was approved by the citizens, and we are allowed by the legislature to enact our own ordinances and our own rules in which we operate. There's a lot of freedom within that, and that's why you see a lot of cities in the Metroplex, which are mostly home rule cities, have a different feel and a different look. It's where the citizens have decided what the direction of their community is going. I will say that the legislature does not give us absolute freedom. They do put limits on us in a lot of ways, and more so lately than we would like. But at the end of the day, we do decide the direction that we are going. So in addition to the city manager, the council also hires several other positions, some of which you'll hear tonight. The council hires a city attorney and a city secretary, and they'll both be explaining their duties tonight. This council also appoints the municipal court judge. And each year, the council is responsible for hiring an independent auditor to evaluate the expenses and the revenues of the city to ensure that everything is being spent according to policies and tax or laws, and then also general accounting standards. And one of the more vital appointments of the city council are the boards and commissions. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to make a plug for that. And I know one person in the room has raised her hand at one point to serve, and we're really happy that you've agreed to look into it. But boards are basically the advisors to the council. They serve in groups of citizens, meet on a regular basis, they hear from staff, and they provide some policy direction. And the policy direction goes to the council and is put into place through ordinances and other regulations. There are other boards that serve in a more of a regulatory manner, like Board of Adjustment and Planning and Zoning, who have approval opportunities that don't require council action. And so you may be familiar with Planning and Zoning and Quality of Life Corporation, but we also have an Animal Services Advisory Board that helps us with our animal shelter policies. Parks and Recreation, Housing Board, a lot of different inputs that we get for different operations, and it's vital that we have citizens who serve in those capacities. And in the council, basically we have that function because the council could not function and take in all of those inputs and policies on a regular basis. They need the citizens to take the information and put it into policy recommendations. And just a little bit about how our operation works under the city manager. I basically have the function of overseeing 14 departments. Each of these are made up of subject matter experts who manage their budgets and their staff according to the direction of the city council. In my opinion, they're all rock stars. You're going to hear from two of them tonight. And they basically have the expertise to advise the council and run the city on a daily basis. In order to handle a load of 14 departments, we also break this up, and I have 3 assistants, a deputy and 2 assistant city managers, and they oversee various departments to help me also work with the council and oversee the operations of the city on a daily basis. And I know that was a little quick, but we wanted to make sure that we had time for the other presentation. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those now. Seeing none, I am going to introduce David Pascal, who is our, oh, I'm sorry. I'm off schedule. We're joined, unfortunately, our city secretary could not be here tonight. She had a previous engagement, so we have asked one of our assistant city managers, Ted Chin, to play the role of the city secretary tonight. So he will present her portion tonight. Ted.
Thank you, Cliff. My name is Ted Chin. I overheard there are several teachers and substitute teachers in the room, so I'm subbing in for Sonia, but I will stick to the curriculum here. So just who can file for office? Well, state law requires that any candidate be a U.S. citizen and of 18 years of age or older. State law also says that you must not have been determined by a final judgment of a court exercising probate jurisdiction to be totally mentally incapacitated or partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote. I'm not sure if that applies to Washington, but it's a state requirement. You also must not have been finally convicted of a felony from which the person has not been pardoned or otherwise released from the resulting disabilities. In other words, you can't be a felon. But aside from the state requirements, the city, through our charter, requires that you be a resident of Mesquite and a qualified voter at the time of filing, when you file your application. You also must reside in Mesquite at least 1 year before the election, which is November 5th. And you must also reside in the district which you would represent at least 120 days or more, but not less than 120 days prior to the election. And I think that's about July 8th, if my math is correct. But all these things are on the application that you fill out, and you also take an oath attesting that those statements are true and correct. So how do you file for office? Well, you complete an application for a place on the ballot, and this must be accompanied by a petition of at least 25 signatures of qualified voters. Now, the city secretary is going to check those names and see if they truly are qualified. Most people will think that they're qualified. They thought maybe they participated in the last election or whatever, but it's wise to get more than 25 signatures just in case a few folks had forgotten that they didn't vote in the last election, or they may not be qualified in any other respect. And again, those qualified voters on the petition must be from within the district that you reside. Okay? The mayor, however, is elected at large. Okay? And if you are running for mayor, signatures can be collected from any qualified voter in the city. For all other council positions, the signatures must be collected from those qualified voters in the district which you are residing or representing. You also have to complete what's known as an acceptance of nomination form, a appointment of a campaign treasurer form. This must be filed with the city secretary prior to accepting any campaign funds. Okay, so you do want to stress that. It's in red font here. It's hard to read. But again, if you're considering taking money for supporting your campaign, you must complete that appointment of campaign treasurer first. And also, you have to complete a form that's called a Code of Fair Campaign Practices, which basically states that you will run a fair campaign. Candidates, when you file for office, candidates' packets will be available at the city secretary's or will be on the city's website no later than June 21st, but you can also contact the city secretary for the paper forms if you prefer that. The first day to file for office is Monday, July 22nd, okay? But the critical day is the last day to file for office. This is the cutoff, is Monday, August 19th. So you'll definitely want to remember that date. Monday, August 19th. Oh, at 5 p.m., very good, yeah. Yeah, we typically close for business at 5 p.m., 8 to 5. So where do you file for office? The city secretary's office. If you don't know where it is, you might want to jot down the phone number at least so you can contact them ahead of time. They're located at 1515 North Galloway, second floor. Financial reports. There are several reports that are required. One is a personal financial statement, and that's due on Monday, September 9th by 5 p.m. There's also several campaign finance reports that are required. One of them is if you file before July 15th, then you must file a semi-annual report that's due on Monday, close of business on July 15th. That's for candidates who have filed a campaign treasurer appointment with the city secretary. There's also a couple other milestones or reports prior to the election. 30 days prior to the election, there's another report due on October 7th by close of business. And also a third one, 8 days out from the election. That would be October 28th, again, by close of business. That's if you are accepting money and you have appointed a campaign treasurer. Let's see. If you're there at the drawing for a placement on the ballot on August 21st, they will give you all these forms that you need to complete, as well as a brief orientation. I've not been there, but I don't know how long that orientation might take, probably with less than an hour, I would assume. But all these forms, they will hand to you if you choose to run, and they'll have an orientation for you. Some important dates to remember, though, is Friday, June 21st. That's when the packets are available online, and there's the city's link, but if you have any assistance, just call the city secretary. They'll guide you through it. The July 15th, that's that semi-annual statement of campaign contributions. The 22nd is the first day to file for office. Critical one, 19th, that's the cutoff, last day to file. Also, on Wednesday, August 21st, that's when they draw for a place on the ballot. Your order of candidates on the ballot for whatever district is determined by random drawing. And if you're not able to attend, you can send someone in your place to draw for you. Monday, September 9th, that's when that personal financial statement is due. And then again, all those reports leading up, they're based on election day, 30 days out, October 7th. October 21st, just FYI, early voting begins. On the 28th, that's when that last report is due. Friday, November 1st, early voting ends. And then the big day, Tuesday, I don't know if you can see it at the bottom there, but Tuesday, November 5th is election day. And then after the election, it takes a little while, the city council will set a date to do what's called a canvass of the votes. That's where they finalize the actual number of votes, who received what number. And they will officially approve the election returns and also administer oaths of office. Wednesday, January 15th, that's right down there. I don't know if you can read that, but Wednesday, January 15th is the semi-annual statement of campaign contributions and expenditures are due, and that's due every year. You have the option of appointing a campaign treasurer, and that can be open and closed at any time, but there is an annual statement, a semi-annual statement that's due every year. Doesn't make sense, but. Any questions, please call the city secretary's office. Again, that number is 972-216-6244. Any questions regarding the paperwork and the process of running for office? If not, I'll introduce, yes. Yes, sir.
So you said that if you had a felony, that you couldn't be elected, but there was a man named Lawrence that committed a murder in Mesquite. Went and served his time. The governor pardoned him. He came back to Mesquite and ran and won election. So we have had a mayor that had a felony that was elected.
Yeah, and it does state not being convicted of a felony from which a person has not been pardoned. not been pardoned.
That's
So,
kind of an important piece, so it feels like it.
Well.
That's a little bit tricky. I found that about a week ago. That week kind of sad.
right.
What kind of question prompted that?
Well, it was,
What were you thinking about?
yes, just to be fair, we're at the meander, and they were talking about, they do all the things, that people that had passed in the city. And I was there that night, there was about 40 people in the room, 30 or 40 people in the room. My wife was with me, and they started telling this story about the mayor shot my brother. Everybody turned and said, "What?" I said, "What do you mean?" Different mayor. I thought I'd give a little break there.
Yeah. Well, the interesting one to me is partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote. So if you have the right to vote and you're partially mentally incapacitated, like myself, I guess you could run for office. With that, I'll introduce Debbie Moll, our director. Yes, sir.
The 25 signatures must now come from the inside the district.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And again, we would advise that you get a little bit more than that, 30, 40, just in case some folks, when they think they're qualified, they may or may not. They may not have kept it up, so to speak, or, yeah. All right, with that, introduce Debbie Moll, our Director of Finance, for the next portion.
Ted? Thank you. Good evening. As Ted said, I'm the Director of Finance for the City of Mesquite, and one of the major responsibilities of a council member, so people considering running for council, is to adopt the city's annual budget. And that's a huge responsibility if you think about it. I like to look at it this way, that the citizens of Mesquite, they pay their hard-earned dollars in the form of property taxes or sales tax or users fees to gain services from the city operations. So the money that they pay in, the services that are provided are a return on their investment. So city council is taking the direction from the citizens as their representatives and setting policies and goals and direction for the city. So the council is responsible for spending those hard-earned dollars by the citizens of Mesquite. So I say it's a return of investment on their hard-earned dollars. The total annual budget for the city of Mesquite is for this fiscal year, 2019, is right around $250 million. So $250 million is the money that it takes to run the city of Mesquite overall. Now, the city has more than just the general fund. The general fund, you'll find out a little bit more details about that later, is about half of that budget. But really, when the council adopts the annual budget, they're adopting all 29 funds that I've kind of shown you here in these categories. There are 5 operating funds. That would be the general fund, the water sewer fund, the drainage utility district fund, and then the airport and golf course are operating funds as well. There are 5 debt service and reserve funds. Those are related to paying back the city's bonded debt for major capital projects. We have 2 internal service funds, 9 special revenue funds. Now, special revenue funds account for monies that are allocated for a particular purpose by law or statute or a program. It can only be spent on certain things as regulated by those areas. And then there are 8 capital projects funds for the city. So annually, every year, the council is hearing from the city manager and city staff about all 29 of these funds, and they're working on adopting that budget on an annual basis. And that's about, like I said, $250 million. So let's talk about the revenue sources that support all of those funds. There are four main revenue sources for the city of Mesquite operations and programs. Of course, one of the largest ones is property taxes, and I'll talk about that one in a little more detail in a moment. Sales tax, we all pay sales tax, right, on taxable sales wherever we go. Well, of the 8.25% that most cities have in total, only 2% of that comes back to the city for taxable sales purchased within those city limits. So the rest of it goes to the state. So only 2% of the sales tax comes back to help operate the city of Mesquite. Users fees, I'll talk about those in a minute. And then the other category are things like fines and forfeitures, which really are set by state or other authorities, grant funds, reimbursements, donations, contributions. So council really doesn't have a lot of say over setting those amounts, but they can have a say in whether we want to participate in a program or not, or receive a contribution or donation or not. So that's where they would have some say in that process. So let's take a look at the property tax side of it. Another big part of the annual budget process is for council to set the annual property tax rate. Now, keep in mind, only 29% of a property owner in the city of Mesquite, only 29% of their tax bill goes to the city. There are other taxing entities that apply taxes to the property owners. You can see here MISD is 48%, Dallas County is 9%. Within Dallas County, there's the hospital district, which is another 10%, and then the Dallas County Community College District is another 4%. So also keep in mind that the staff nor council set the taxable values of those properties within the city. Excuse me, the Dallas Central Appraisal District sets the values for those in Dallas County. We have a portion of Mesquite and Kaufman County, so the Kaufman Central Appraisal District sets those values. So you can see council only represents and sets the tax rate for 29% of the tax bill and doesn't really have much say in the values, the taxable values that are set. So the tax rate is set to generate enough revenues to run the operations of the city, and we'll talk about where the tax rate, property taxes really are only part of the general fund and the 4B quality of life fund, which is one of our capital project or special revenue funds. So keep that in mind as well. So that's property taxes. Let's talk about user fees next. So City Council also has an impact on setting the users' fees and the rates. Now, users' fees and rates, they relate to charges for a particular service or an activity or a good that a customer decides to purchase. So for instance, like water sewer rates, that is what funds the water sewer fund and the operations within that fund. The drainage fees are set by council. Other fees would include things like parks and recreation fees, like we're here at the Florence Rec Center, so to participate in different sporting activities here, people pay fees for that. So council has a say in setting those fees. Permits, building permits, things like that. Rental rates for different facilities throughout the city, library service charges, things like that is what makes up all of these other fees. Staff will review those other fees on an annual basis and then present any proposed changes to council during the annual budget process. And council will approve any changes. And again, those rates are set at a level to cover the cost of running that program or operation as much as feasible or possible to cover the cost. So council has a say in the revenue side. Then, of course, there's the spending allocation. So council also approves the spending side of the budget. There are really four main categories of spending. One is personal services. So Cliff mentioned that the city has right around 1,200 employees. So personal services is where the salaries, wages, benefits, and that are categorized for all the employees of the city. And there are employees in the various funds, all in those 29 funds, and the employees are paid out of some of those funds. Then there's the supply category. That would just be the typical types of supplies to run an operation or a program. Contractual services includes things like legal fees, consulting fees, utilities, maintenance and repair costs to run operations, training costs, things like that. Then there's the capital outlay side of it. This is the cost for equipment and major capital projects in the city. The major capital projects would include things like the repair or building of new roads and streets and alleys. It might be the infrastructure for the water and sewer mains throughout the city or the drainage channels and things that you see. So those are the major capital projects. The city funds those with bonds. We sell bonds every year. So council, during the budget process, we give a list of all the proposed capital projects and equipment purchases for the next year, and council approves that list as well, and what the bonds would be sold for in the next fiscal year. So that's the spending allocations. So let's talk again about the general fund. The general fund is the main operating budget or main operating fund of the city. Like I said, it makes up about 50% of that $250 million, so about $125 million of revenues and spending is taking place in the general fund. And you can see why. Public safety, which is police and fire, makes up more than 53% of the general fund budget. Where Cliff said about 230-something of his employees carry guns, well, there's probably over 300 staff on the police department alone, and then over 180, I believe, in fire. So they do have a bigger portion of the city staff and to cover the public safety issues within the city. Debt service, that is the category, it's 15% of the general fund budget. That's paying back the debt for those major capital projects. So it's quite expensive to build a road or build a water main or a sewer line. It's very expensive. So you can imagine why that is a higher percentage of the general fund budget. General government, that is the category that houses like city manager's office, finance, IT, city attorney's office. Those kind of operations are in general government. Public works is your engineering and traffic and the signs and signals and your I lost my GIS, things like that are public works. And your streets, that's a big one, and sanitation, those are big operations within the general fund. Quality life services, this is planning and development, housing and community services, and neighborhood services, which is where code enforcement is. And the program services is small, but that is parks and recreation and library. So that is the breakdown of the general fund budget. So again, the majority of the budget discussions that you'll hear council talking about is related to general fund. So I just want to say, too, about the general fund, the revenue sources, 45% of the revenues to fund all of that comes from property taxes. 27% comes from sales tax. So about 72% of the total revenues is made up in those two revenue sources. So it's a big deal for the general fund. So then let's talk about the budget process. So there really is almost a full year cycle for the city council. Starting in January, the city manager will hold policy retreat workshops with the city council for them to bring in and discuss what their overall objectives are for the city based on what they're hearing from the citizens, the input that they give. And then in March, the city manager again will schedule a meeting with the council to kind of narrow down those overall objectives into goals that would be set maybe to drive the direction of the budget for the next fiscal year and to give direction to the city manager and to the staff. So then in July, the staff starts to prepare their budget requests for the next year and what their needs are. The city manager will present a proposed budget to council in July. And then during July and August, the council will review the budget. They'll have presentations by staff to give them ideas of what's in their budget and why, and then they'll hold some budget work sessions to ask questions and deliberate on the budget that's on the table. And then City Council will also hold public hearings to give the citizens a chance to voice their opinion, ask questions, give their input in regards to the budget, and that happens in July, August, and September. Then when it comes to August, the City Council will set a tax rate, and then in September, they will actually approve any fee or rate changes. They'll approve the budget, and then they'll actually adopt the tax rate that they're proposing to run the city operations the next year. So that is the overall schedule, which, like I said, it's quite a long process. So one other thing I want to mention is that one thing that City Council, that our current City Council and previous ones have been big on is transparency, making sure that we're a transparent and a data-driven government. So we do have all of our financial information. Most of everything is available on the city's website. You can see in the upper right corner where it's highlighted, it says Government Transparency. You click on the little magnifying glass, and then it takes you to the landing page for the city's financial transparency landing page. The city did earn the 5 transparency stars from the state comptroller's office, and that's kind of a big deal. We were the 6th city out of all the cities in Texas to earn all 5 stars, and that happened last fall. The Texas comptroller launched that program to recognize cities, counties, and school districts making strides to greater government transparency by putting key financial information out and available on their websites to their citizens. The 5 categories include, and that's under the financial transparency tile there, it's traditional finances, contracts and procurement, economic development, debt, and public pension. Along with that, the city puts out their budget, which is all the revenues and expenditures for those budgeted funds. And then the open checkbook is the city's checkbook. So you could go, we run checks twice a week. And so every Friday, this web page and all this information is updated from our financial system. So it's good information for our citizens to have available to them. We have other reports available in the various finance divisions that have pages on the website. So the City Council has a big say in the annual budget process. It's a big part of what they do. So I would answer any questions you might have regarding the finances or the budget. And I was going to stage some people tonight.
It's every third Thursday, and then it's posted every Friday?
Yes, we run checks Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then this is all updated every Friday at 4 p.m. We update the website. Yes. Yeah. Okay, with that, I will introduce David Pascal. He's our city attorney.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Pascal. I'm the new city attorney here. Just started in January, full-time with the city. Y'all heard Mr. Chin talking about the elections coming up in November. That seems like it might be a little ways off, but I tell you, May's almost done. I can't believe it. So this election will be here before we know it. I'm really pleased we've had a chance to share this information with everybody tonight and 2 other meetings that we've previously had. And what I'm going to share with you is just a little bit of information about a couple of things that impact the role of a city council member. There are lots of things that do impact what they do and how they carry out their responsibilities, such as you heard Mr. Kahili talking about the city charter. We've got that, the code of ethics, there's policies and procedures. They contain a number of different subjects that help guide a city council in performing their roles. But what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is a couple of things you may have heard about, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit about them tonight. And that's the Texas Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act, which is Texas's version of Freedom of Information Act. And the goals of these 2 acts dovetails with what Ms. Mull was speaking about with respect to transparency. That's the objective of both of these acts, is to bring transparency to government. Matter of fact, the purpose of the Open Meetings Act is to ensure that the government is transparent, open, and accountable, and the Public Information Act to bring transparency to government documents. So while that seems like a pretty simple concept, I want to let you know that there actually is a lot involved. For instance, the Open Meetings Act has over 75 sections. The Public Information Act has almost twice that. There's lots of subsections, hundreds of subsections, regulation rules, exceptions, and then what'll really make you scratch your head are exceptions to exceptions. So, but we help everyone work through that. So let's dive into the Open Meetings Act, and what we'll do is just briefly look at when the Open Meeting Act applies, some of the notice requirements, record-keeping requirements, and there are penalties, and we'll go over those generally. And while we're looking at that, just keep in mind the general rule is that all meetings of the City Council are open to the public, except only where the Open Meetings Act says that there can be a closed meeting, also called an executive session. All right, so when does the act apply? Well, the act applies to any meeting of the City Council, so we need to know what a meeting of the City Council is. So a meeting occurs when you have one of 3 things. First, there's got to be a quorum of the City Council present. So that's a majority. We have 7 on the City Council. So anytime there are 4 of them together, that's a quorum. All right, secondly, there's got to be the public business of the city being discussed. So if you've got a quorum and discussion of public business, we need one more thing for the Open Meetings Act to apply. And it's got to be either this A or B. Either the member participates, one of the members participates in the discussion, or it's a called meeting for the purpose of conducting their business. And you're all familiar with Subpart B. I know many of you, I've seen some of you at the meetings. Perhaps you've watched some online. That's the easy part. But do notice on that Subpart A, so if you've got a quorum, 4 people sitting around talking about, city council members, talking about the business of the city, and one of them they're participating in that, then that meeting is subject to the Open Meetings Act, meaning there's got to be notice requirements met and record keeping met. Now, there are some exceptions. The act doesn't apply if they're meeting in a social setting, they're at a training event or something like that. And so the habit we try to encourage everybody is just to think about, well, is this a meeting? And if so, is it properly noticed? And if not, then they need to back away from that. So let's look at some of the notice requirements for a meeting. So if there is all of those requirements, a meeting's going on, then it's got to be properly noticed. There must be a written notice that includes the date, hour, place of the meeting and the subject of everything that will be discussed at the meeting. And that's both for the open meetings and any closed meeting. You got to give notice of that subject. And the notice of the subject must be adequate to apprise the public of what is being discussed. That's why you'll never see on any agenda something like old business or new business, because that doesn't apprise you of what the council is going to discuss that evening. And of course, the notice has to be posted. It's always on our website, and if you've ever been to City Hall, you've seen there's a bulletin board right outside the front doors, and these notices are posted there as well. All right, so if there's a notice meeting, council's meeting, you also have to keep a record of that. That would be the city secretary's job to make sure there are minutes kept and that there's a recording of the meeting. We keep a video recording that includes audio, and so that is met. And these recordings are subject to the Information Act, which I'll go over in a minute. But those are also on our website. Y'all saw I think the home page Ms. Moles showed you in her presentation. If you go there and go into the Government tab, you can find all of the agenda for the city council meetings. You can find the packets if you really want to see all of the information these council members review. There's a lot of information there they study to help them make good decisions. And the videos are really good. If you've not gone there, I do encourage you to do that because the videos are tabbed according to the agenda. Some of these meetings, as Mr. Casper can tell you, are not exactly short. And so if you're watching that meeting and you're only interested in one part of it, you can get right to that part of the meeting that you're interested in. All right, so let's look at some requirements that actually do apply in a meeting. First of all, the meeting cannot start until you've got a quorum, so you got to have at least 4 members present. This is a little surprising thing. The Open Meetings Act does not require that the public be allowed to talk. Now, there are other laws that require that. For instance, if we've got a zoning matter, the zoning laws do require that the public be allowed to give input, but the Open Meetings Act doesn't require that. But of course, I hope all of you know at every city council meeting we have, it starts with a citizens forum, and citizens are allowed to speak on any subject they want. The council can impose reasonable rules with respect to time and ask you not to be repetitious. And one of those rules, actually from the Open Meetings Act, though, is that if in the citizens forum somebody talks about something that's not on the agenda, then the council cannot deliberate on that subject. And the reason, again, we just covered that is because we have to give notice to the public of everything that will be discussed. So if a subject's raised that's not on that agenda, we can give you some facts, give you policy. Somebody might could put it on a future agenda, or what most often occurs is senior staff will be present at these meetings, and that person can then be linked up with a staff person who can hopefully help them start work on their issue. All right, and I mentioned a little bit about executive sessions, closed sessions. You may have seen sometimes the council will start their meeting and then they'll go back into a conference room and deliberate. They can only do that where the Open Meetings Act says that they're allowed to do that. And so there's also a routine. As a matter of fact, at our last city council meeting, you might have noticed that if you watched it or if you were there, at the very first part of the meeting, the council came in, they sat down, the mayor opened the meeting, and then he said, okay, now we're going to go to a closed meeting. Well, why do they do that? Because the Open Meetings Act requires it. It requires them to come in, to convene in an open meeting. It requires that the subject and the section of the Open Meetings Act that allows the closed meeting, that be read, and that they then can have that closed meeting. So that's why they do that way. Some of the most common topics that are discussed in a executive session are things such as deliberating on the purchase, exchange, lease of real estate, to discuss the appointment, employment, evaluation, discipline of an employee or an officer, and to consult with an attorney to get legal advice or talk about lawsuits or settlement offers. All right, I mentioned we would cover some of the violations. So there are some penalties in connection with this. These are not just aspirational statutes. They're the law. We always exceed them, but you should know there are penalties for violating them. First of all, just civilly, if the council were to take some action in violation of the Open Meetings Act, then whatever action the council took, it can be undone as though it never occurred. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen. But then personally, people can be criminally liable for violating the act. That could be a misdemeanor with a fine up to $500 and 6 months in jail. Now, I do have outlined here something called a walking quorum. It's really kind of interesting. I've mentioned this in the other meetings. If the council knowingly tries to circumvent the Open Meetings Act by meeting in numbers of less than a quorum, that is a violation of the act. And let me explain to you how that occurs. The example I've used is there was an instance, I believe it's out in West Texas, where a senior staff member and I think a mayor went in an office, and maybe another council member was in there. And this was in the days when video cameras first came to town. And there's a video camera shooting down the hallway, and they had the videotape. And you could see during the course of the evening, one council member would go in, another council member would go out. One would go in, one would go out. And over that course, they eventually had a quorum, not present at one time, but over that course, who were deliberating the city's business. And that's a no-no, that's a violation of the act. And I think it was Mr. Garcia or somebody mentioned another one that you have to be careful not to let it happen, is during a recess of a meeting, and I think this is an actual case, some council members were in the restroom, and as people do, they just started talking. That's a no-no with respect to public business. You can't do that. You got to go back out to the open meeting. All right. So let's do the same with respect to the Public Information Act. When does it apply? What are some of the procedures? The Attorney General plays an important role in connection with the Public Information Act, and then go over some penalties. And the general rule is just kind of the mirror image of the Open Meetings Act, and that is all information of the city is presumed open unless the Public Information Act says that you should withhold it or you can withhold it. All right, so what does the Public Information Act apply to? It applies to public information. So what is public information? All right, so that's the information that the city's either required by law or ordinance to collect, and that's pretty easy. If you're required to collect it, okay, that's public information. But it also includes any information relating to the transaction of official business of the city. So let's look at that a little bit closer. That is going to be essentially every kind of information that's nonverbal. It can include video, it can include emails, text messages, all of that. And it's important to note that that is information located essentially anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the city secretary's office, the city manager's office, the police department. If it's reflecting the transaction of public business and it's on a person's home computer, on their phone, then that information is subject to the Public Information Act. All right, let's look at some of the procedures on how the Public Information Act applies. There are a couple of requirements to implicate the Public Information Act. First, the request to the government, or the city in this case, must be in writing. So though if you call down to the city and you ask for something, you're going to get good customer service. We're going to try to provide you what you've asked for, but to actually implicate the procedures of the Information Act, the request has to be in writing. Now, if the request is for something that we don't have, new documents, the city's not required to create those. City doesn't have to answer questions. Fortunately, I don't have to do legal research if you ask me to. But if you ask for any public information, then we're going to get that to you if the Information Act allows that. All right, so let's assume we do have a Public Information Act request that comes in. How does the city respond? Well, so if it's not information that the city's supposed to withhold, then it's got to be produced within a reasonable time. And generally a reasonable time is 10 business days. Now, if it's real voluminous or it's real hard to get our hands on it, we can contact you and let you know that, and that time can be extended. But generally that's going to be 10 days. All of the requests have to be treated the same. You can't give anybody preferential treatment. And reasonable fees can be charged for collecting and producing that information. All right, so what do we do if the Information Act says, well, you're not supposed to produce that or you can withhold it? So the city can't just withhold it. Instead, the city is required to submit a request for an opinion to the Attorney General's office. And then the Attorney General can issue an opinion on whether the exception applies. If the AG says it does, then the information is withheld. If the AG says no, it doesn't apply, then that information is pushed out to the requester. So let's look. I'm not going to go through all of these steps, and this is really just a brief outline of the Attorney General process. But what I do want you to know is there are some strict deadlines the city has to meet with respect to asking for an AG opinion. There are some strict deadlines for the AG responding to that request, and during the course of that process, the requester is kept informed of what's going on. And just as with the Open Meetings Act, there are some penalties for violating the Public Information Act. With respect to civil remedies, if a requester has asked for something and they believe the AG or the city got it wrong, they can bring suit, they can file a complaint with the AG. I do want you to know the requester cannot be sued during any of that process, though. The city also has a remedy. So let's say we make a request, the AG says, no, we don't agree that that exception applies. The city can sue the Attorney General, but the city has to do that down in Austin and Travis County, and must do that within 30 days from the date that the AG made the ruling. And there also are some criminal penalties. So for instance, let me see, for refusing to provide information, or misusing confidential information, there's a fine up to $1,000 and 6 months in jail, and this also constitutes official misconduct. Somebody can be removed from office for that. And then destroying information up to 3 months in jail and $4,000. So I've kind of rushed through this. I hope I've given you a good overview of these two acts and why it is the city does things certain ways. I've kind of jokingly told everybody that these acts are meant to bring sunlight to the business of the government, and I hope my discussion of criminal penalties and deadlines has not caused a cloud of concern for you, because that's one of the roles of staff, is to help our council members exceed the minimum requirements of our state laws and our local laws. But I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has on this or anything else. All right, if not, then I will turn this back over to our city manager to wrap up our meeting.
Thank you, David. If you did not collect one when you came in, we do have a packet of all of the district maps for you to take with you. We also have a handout of all those important dates if you are interested in filing for as a candidate. If you want to view this again, these will be available on our city website. And you know, at this time, we're happy to answer any questions at the microphone. But as I said, if you're don't want to ask a question in front of the group, we're here all evening. So, sir, are you going to ask a question?
Sure. Sergio Garcia, 223 East Kimbrough Street, Mesquite, 75149. I've been to all three of these last week and this week. I appreciate the work you've all done. It's a lot of good information, and there's a lot of good information for anybody thinking about running. I know that when we had the Charter Review Committee last year, there was a lot of questions brought up, and one thought that was brought up at the time that people may be curious about is once the filing is open and we hold it for the month and then it closes, if nobody has filed, what happens then? If somebody doesn't file for a district?
I'll defer to the city attorney, because I bet he has the answer.
Well, with a big caveat, you know, it's surprising how often you ask a lawyer. You'd think the lawyer would know the answer like that. With the caveat that I'd need to research that to make sure the answer is correct. I think there'd be a vacancy in that position, and our charter has a provision for the council filling vacancies, which is by appointment. So that's what I think would occur, but I'd want to double check that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
That was going to be my answer too. So. Anyone else have any questions? I don't see a rush for the microphone, so we will close out the meeting. Again, we want to thank everyone for spending a little time with us to get a little bit of a deeper understanding of how we operate and what the process looks like. So I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you.